When someone gets aggressive with you, their entire strategy relies on one thing, your reaction. They want you to get defensive. They want you to snap back, to raise your voice, to lose control, because the moment you do, they win. That's how they feed their ego. That's how they stay in control. But here's what they don't expect. You to pause, you to stop mid-chaos, breathe, and say absolutely nothing. Because silence in that moment, it's louder than any argument you could make. The power of pause isn't weakness, it's control. It's the ability to stop yourself from stepping into their emotional storm. You see, aggressive people operate like emotional thieves. They don't just want your attention, they want your energy. They want you to react because your reaction justifies their aggression. When you pause, you take away their fuel. It's like they throw a match expecting an explosion, but all they get is quiet. That quiet makes them uncomfortable because they can't control what they can't provoke. When someone raises their voice, you don't have to match it. When they throw words like knives, you don't have to bleed for them. You can pause, you can look at them, stay still, and let that silence do the work. Because here's the truth, most people aren't used to being met with composure. They expect chaos, they expect shouting, they expect drama. So when you don't give them that, when you don't play their game, you flip the script entirely. That pause isn't just for them, it's for you. It gives you space to think, to breathe, to decide what kind of person you want to be in that moment. Because no matter how powerful their words sound, you always have a choice in how you respond. And the pause, that's where the choice lies. It's where emotional maturity separates itself from emotional reaction. Think about it like this. Every second you wait before responding is a second you regain control. It's like watching someone swing wildly while you stay perfectly balanced. They lose energy, you gain presence. They look unstable, you look strong. That pause allows you to anchor yourself in calm while they unravel in chaos. And make no mistake, they will notice it. You'll see it in their face, the confusion, the frustration, maybe even a flicker of guilt. Because when someone's expecting a fight and they get silence, it reflects their aggression back to them. It's like holding up a mirror to their behavior. Suddenly, they hear how ridiculous they sound, they feel how tense they are, and for a moment, they have to confront it. That's the moment you take back the power. But pausing isn't about winning. It's not about being smug or silent out of pride. It's about protecting your peace. Because your peace is the one thing they can't take from you unless you hand it over. And too many people hand it over in seconds just by reacting. The pause reminds you that your emotions belong to you, not them. It's a small space of stillness that keeps you from saying things you'll regret later, from matching energy that doesn't deserve your effort. Even in professional settings, the pause is one of the most effective communication tools you'll ever use. When a coworker or client comes at you with aggression, a simple moment of silence, no facial reaction, no defensive body language, can completely change the dynamic. It sends the message, I heard you, but you don't control this conversation. And when you finally do respond, your words carry more weight because you didn't waste them in the noise. Here's the thing most people never realize, silence is not passive, it's active, it's deliberate. It's a signal that you are choosing control over chaos. It's the mental equivalent of standing tall while the storm passes around you. You are not avoiding the conflict, you're mastering it. You are showing that you are not afraid of tension, you're just not feeding it. And that's psychological power. Aggressive people depend on your predictability. The moment they yell, they expect you to yell back. The moment they push, they expect you to push harder. But when you pause, you become unpredictable. You disrupt their rhythm. You throw them off balance because your calm doesn't fit their script. They don't know where to go from there. And that pause makes them reflect because when the energy they send out doesn't come back, they have to face themselves. The pause also gives you something rare, clarity. You get to hear the real meaning behind their words, not just the volume. You get to see their emotion, not just their anger. You start understanding where it's coming from. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's insecurity, maybe it's control. And when you see it clearly, you can respond with precision instead of reaction. So the next time someone comes at you aggressively, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't explain yourself immediately. Don't defend what doesn't need defending. Just pause. Look at them. Breathe that silence. It's not empty. It's full of power, full of composure, full of self-respect. It says, you don't get to pull me into your storm. I stand where I choose. Disarm and raspas. When someone comes at you with aggression, their goal isn't just to talk, it's to dominate. They want to overpower the room, control the tone, and make you feel small. And most people fall right into that trap. They raise their voice, match the energy, and before they know it, they're in a shouting match that solves absolutely nothing. But the strongest person in that moment isn't the loudest one, it's the calmest one. The person who stays composed when everyone else loses control holds the real power. That's where the art of the disarming response comes in. The disarming response is not about being passive or submissive. It's about using calm as your weapon, a quiet confidence that flips the emotional script without ever breaking a sweat. When you stay calm, it doesn't mean you agree with the aggression, it means you refuse to give it control over you, because anger feeds on reaction. And when you don't give it one, it starves. Imagine someone is yelling at you, throwing accusations, trying to make you react. You look at them, not with fear or defensiveness, but with steady eyes and a composed tone. You say something like, "I can hear that you're upset." Simple, non-defensive, grounded. In that moment, you've just changed the game. You didn't meet fire with fire, you met it with water. You didn't match their aggression, you reflected it. And that reflection is powerful because it forces them to see how they're acting. It makes them aware of their own tone. Aggressive people expect resistance. They expect you to argue, to justify yourself, to match their volume. They know how to fight chaos with chaos. That's their comfort zone. What they don't know how to fight is calm. Your calmness becomes uncomfortable for them because it shows emotional control they don't have. You're not reacting, you're observing. You're not falling into their pattern, you're rewriting it. And the moment you do that, you shift from being their target to being the mirror that exposes their behavior. The beauty of the disarming response lies in how simple it sounds, but how powerful it feels. You don't need clever comebacks. You don't need to win the argument. You just need to master your tone and your pace. When you speak slowly and calmly, you set a rhythm that their aggression can't keep up with. The energy in the room changes because you refuse to let theirs dominate it. Here's what's interesting. When you lower your voice, they often have to lower theirs just to keep the conversation going. That's psychology at work. People subconsciously mirror the emotional energy they receive. If you meet anger with calm, most of the time, the aggression begins to dissolve. And even if it doesn't, the person who stays calm always walks away with the upper hand because calm communicates authority. Now, let's be clear. A disarming response doesn't mean you let people walk over you. It doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It means you refuse to let their behavior dictate yours. You can still be firm. You can still set boundaries. You can say, "I'm not going to be spoken to like that," without yelling. You can say, "We can talk about this when you're calm," without sounding dismissive. Because your goal isn't to fight, it's to end the fight before it begins. The real power of a disarming response is emotional control. When you stay calm, you communicate that you're not emotionally available for chaos. You show that you're grounded, and that makes the other person feel their lack of grounding even more. They realize, often subconsciously, that their aggression is ineffective. It's not getting the reaction it used to. And when people realize their old tactics don't work on you anymore, they start to change how they treat you. Think of your calm as a shield. Every aggressive word that comes your way hits that shield and bounces off, losing its power. You're not ignoring it, you're choosing how to let it affect you. Because here's the truth, no one can make you feel small without your permission. The disarming response takes that permission away. It says, "You don't get access to my peace. You don't get to set the tone for me." It takes strength to stay calm when someone is being disrespectful. It takes maturity to stay centered when someone's trying to drag you into their storm. But that's exactly what makes the disarming response so effective. It requires emotional discipline. You can't fake calm, it has to be real. It comes from self-respect, from knowing you don't need to prove your worth in that conversation. You already know it. And here's something most people never realize. When you respond with calm confidence, people remember it. They may forget your words, but they will never forget how small their aggression felt next to your composure. They'll remember the way you made them feel exposed without ever raising your voice. That's the mark of someone with real emotional intelligence. That's the kind of power that doesn't just win arguments. It changes the way people show up around you. When someone comes at you with aggression, it's easy to point the finger and say, "You're being rude," or "You're acting crazy." But here's the thing, those words pour gasoline on the fire. The moment you attack their character, they stop listening to what you're saying and start defending who they are. The conversation shifts from problem solving to ego protection. That's why one of the smartest verbal strategies you can ever use is to label the energy, not the person. Instead of saying, "You're angry," you say, "This sounds like a really frustrating situation." Instead of saying, "You're out of control," you say, "It feels like this conversation is getting intense." What you're doing there is magic. It's psychology in action. You're acknowledging the emotion without attacking the ego. You're validating the feeling without validating the behavior, and that single shift turns confrontation into communication. Aggressive people are often running on emotion, not logic. They're not thinking clearly. They're reacting from a place of insecurity, stress, or fear. When you label their energy, you interrupt that emotional current. You're showing them that you see what's happening, but you're not feeding into it. You're saying, "I see your emotion, but I'm not afraid of it." That's grounding. That's leadership. For example, let's say someone's raising their voice, pointing fingers, and trying to dominate the space, you can take a slow breath, stay composed, and say something like, "It sounds like this really matters to you." You haven't accused them of anything. You haven't mirrored their aggression. You've simply acknowledged the passion behind their words. Most of the time, that diffuses tension immediately. Why? Because when people feel seen, they start to calm down. The need to shout fades when someone finally feels heard. Labeling the energy also sends a subtle message that you're emotionally intelligent, that you can see beneath the surface of their reaction. It tells them, "You can't manipulate me with volume or emotion. I see what's actually happening here." That shifts the power dynamic. You're no longer reacting to their words. You're responding to their state. You're no longer part of the chaos. You're the calm observer of it. There's another layer to this. When you label the energy, you're guiding the tone of the conversation. You're steering it away from blame and toward understanding. For instance, if someone says, "You never listen to me," instead of firing back, "That's not true," you can say, "It sounds like you're feeling ignored." Now, instead of two people attacking each other, you've redirected it to the real emotion, feeling unheard. And when you do that, you create space for solutions. The power in this approach is that it keeps your dignity intact. You're not stooping to their level. You're not playing defense. You're using emotional clarity as your strength. Most people try to fight emotion with logic, and it never works. Emotion doesn't respond to facts, it responds to acknowledgement. The moment someone feels that their emotion is recognized, their guard begins to drop. You're not agreeing with their aggression, you're diffusing it by identifying it. Now, here's where the real transformation happens. When you get good at labeling energy, you become unshakable in tense situations. Because instead of absorbing the emotion in the room, you start to read it like data. You can sense when anger is really fear. You can sense when defensiveness is really shame. You can sense when hostility is really a cry for control. That level of awareness gives you mastery over your reactions. You stop internalizing other people's storms because you understand they're not about you. They're about what's happening inside them. And here's what's powerful. When you start reflecting people's emotional states back to them in calm, clear language, it makes them self-aware. Sometimes for the first time, you see their expression shift, their body relaxes a little, their tone softens. It's not because you won the argument. It's because you gave their feelings words they couldn't find themselves. You became the mirror that helped them see what they were really expressing. This technique works everywhere, in relationships, at work, even with strangers. Let's say someone cuts you off and starts arguing in public. Instead of escalating, you can say, "I can see this situation's stressful." That simple sentence turns down the volume on the whole encounter. Because aggression thrives on escalation. The moment you don't match it, it weakens. The moment you name it, it loses its mystery. Labeling the energy also protects your peace. You stop personalizing people's moods. You stop letting their frustration become your frustration. You recognize what belongs to you and what doesn't. You learn that someone's tone isn't your responsibility. Their anger isn't your fault. Your job isn't to fix their feelings. It's to stay aware of your own. The more you practice this, the stronger you become in emotional intelligence. You learn how to turn tension into dialogue, hostility into understanding. And that's what real communication is. It's not about silencing the other person. It's about guiding them back to a place where both of you can actually be heard. You're not fighting to win anymore. You're leading with awareness. And that changes everything about the way people respond to you. One of the most underrated yet powerful verbal tricks you can ever use when dealing with aggressive people is silence, not sarcasm. Not shouting louder, not walking away in a huff, just silence. Most people think silence is weakness, but in reality, it's one of the strongest communication tools you'll ever have. Silence shows control. Silence unsettles aggressive people because it takes away the one thing they feed on: your reaction. When someone's attacking you with words, they want energy from you. They want your defensiveness, your anger, your emotional explosion. It validates their aggression. It proves to them that they have control. But when you meet that energy with calm silence, you starve it. You remove the fuel from their fire. They're left shouting into the emptiness, wondering why their words aren't working anymore. And in that moment, something powerful shifts. The balance of control swings back to you. Imagine an argument where someone's trying to provoke you. They're throwing insults, exaggerations, maybe even threats. The natural instinct is to fire back, to defend yourself, to make them see your side. But here's the truth. They're not in a state to understand your logic. They're emotional, reactive, and not hearing a single word you say. So instead of matching that noise, pause. Look at them. Let the silence stretch. Do you know what happens? The energy changes. Their aggression starts to echo back at them. They begin to feel the weight of their own words. That's the power of silence. It turns their mirror around. In that silence, you communicate something far louder than words ever could. You're saying, "You can't shake me." You're saying, "I'm not playing your emotional game." Silence disarms aggression without confrontation. It demands respect without saying a thing, because true authority doesn't need to prove itself. It just stands there, unshaken. Now, this doesn't mean passive silence. This isn't about shrinking back or avoiding conflict. It's about intentional silence, the kind that carries weight, the kind where you stay present, calm and aware. Your body language matters here. You're not crossing your arms or rolling your eyes. You're holding your ground with composure. That silence tells them, I see you, I hear you, but I'm not giving you my peace. Psychologically, silence creates discomfort for the aggressor. They expect chaos, they expect reaction. When they don't get it, they're forced to confront their own behavior. It makes them self-conscious, sometimes even embarrassed, because nothing reflects immaturity more clearly than one person yelling while the other remains calm. That calm becomes a mirror, showing them exactly who they're being in that moment. Silence also gives you time to think. It slows the tempo of the interaction, letting you assess instead of react. You can read their body language, listen between the words, and respond strategically. You regain emotional control. Because when you speak from silence, not from emotion, you speak with clarity. Every word that follows has intention. Every phrase has impact. You're no longer part of the chaos, you're directing it. There's something deeply powerful about a composed pause after someone throws verbal punches. That pause says, you don't decide my tempo. It says, I won't match your chaos. And when you finally do speak, your voice carries more weight. Because you've made them listen. You've earned the space. Silence is the verbal equivalent of exhaling slowly in a storm. It steadies you while everything around you swirls. And here's the irony. Silence can sometimes make an apology happen faster than arguing ever could. When people hear their own aggression bouncing back at them in that empty space, they often realize how unnecessary it sounds. That realization doesn't happen when you interrupt them. It happens when you let their words hang in the air unchallenged. You gave them room to hear themselves. Silence also teaches boundaries without explanation. You don't have to say, I don't tolerate disrespect. You simply don't respond to it. You don't reward it with attention. You don't argue with it. And that's a message people remember. Because silence is not the absence of communication. It's a statement in itself. It's a reminder that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it just breathes and watches. When you learn to use silence with intention, you become someone who doesn't need to fight for respect. You command it. Because silence backed by confidence is not weakness. It's strength in its purest, most controlled form. When someone comes at you aggressively, the last thing they expect is curiosity. They expect defensiveness, they expect an argument, they expect your emotions to flare up and meet theirs. But when you respond with calm, intentional questions, you completely disarm their aggression. You shift the entire power dynamic. Because questions do something brilliant, they take the emotional intensity and turn it into a thinking exercise. And thinking and aggression can't exist in the same breath. Imagine someone raises their voice at you, trying to dominate the conversation, trying to prove a point by force. Instead of fighting fire with fire, you take a slow breath and say, can you help me understand what you're really upset about? Or, why does this matter so much to you? Suddenly, their brain has to switch gears. They were ready to argue, but now they have to think. They have to explain themselves. And that's where the shift happens. Because anger thrives on chaos, not clarity. The moment you introduce logic and curiosity, the aggression begins to crumble. When you ask questions, you're not surrendering control, you're taking it back. You're saying, I refuse to meet you at your lowest emotional point. I'm going to bring you up to mine. That's psychological judo. You're using their momentum against them, but with calm precision. It's not about manipulation, it's about leading the interaction back to reason. Because when people feel seen even for a second, they start lowering their walls, they soften. They start explaining instead of attacking. One of the most effective verbal tricks in heated moments is to shift the focus from emotion to perspective. You can say things like, what outcome are you hoping for right now? Or, is your goal to find a solution? Or do you just want me to understand where you're coming from? Those questions cut through the noise. They force the other person to stop reacting and start reflecting. And even if they don't answer calmly right away, you've already changed the rhythm of the conversation. You're not letting aggression dictate the direction, you are. Questions are powerful because they do two things simultaneously. They communicate empathy and assert control. When you ask someone, why do you feel that way? Or, what do you need from me right now? It doesn't sound defensive or weak. It sounds strong, grounded, and mature. You're not escalating, you're directing. You're inviting them to speak from reason instead of reaction. That's emotional intelligence at work. And aggressive people aren't equipped to fight emotional intelligence. It's not a language they know how to win in. The beauty of questions is that they interrupt the emotional loop. Most conflicts are just the same sentence repeated in louder tones. Nobody's listening, just reacting. But a question changes the pattern. It introduces a pause, a reflection, a moment of awareness. That's where you reclaim your power. Because in every conflict, the person who controls the tone controls the outcome. And tone is guided by intent. Questions make your intent clear. You're not here to fight, you're here to understand and resolve. And here's something deeper. When you use questions, you're forcing accountability without confrontation. If someone says, "You never listen," you can calmly respond, "What makes you feel unheard?" That's not sarcasm, it's focus. It makes them realize that their accusation is vague. It invites them to articulate their emotion instead of weaponizing it. And as they do, their aggression loses its edge. You're not fighting back, you're making them define what they mean. You're turning their emotion into conversation instead of conflict. Aggressive people hate uncertainty, but questions create exactly that. They make the other person reflect, hesitate, and often backtrack. Because the moment they have to explain themselves, they begin to see the cracks in their own argument. They realize that their tone doesn't match the reason they claim to have. And that's not something you have to point out, they'll feel it. Think about it, the calmest person in the room is always the most powerful one. And calm people don't demand control, they guide it. They don't react, they redirect. That's what using questions does. It keeps you grounded in reason while pulling the other person out of chaos. It turns a potential explosion into a dialogue. It turns a verbal attack into a teaching moment without you ever needing to raise your voice. And the most important thing to remember is that your questions are not to appease them. They're to protect your peace. Every time you ask instead of argue, you take back emotional territory. You remind yourself that you're the anchor, not the wave. You're not going to be pulled into their storm. You're going to make them stand in the calm that you create. Because when you master the art of asking questions in conflict, you stop playing defense and start leading with quiet power. When a conversation with an aggressive person starts winding down, this is the most critical phase. It's where most people lose their composure because emotions are high. The tension has built up, and every instinct tells you to get the last word. But that's exactly where you need to do the opposite. The way you end that interaction determines how the other person remembers you, and more importantly, how much peace you walk away with. The trick is simple: end with calm assertiveness, not emotion. Calm assertiveness is the voice of control. It's steady, grounded, and clear. It's not about being passive or submissive. It's about owning your words with confidence without needing to shout them. When you stay calm at the end, you send a message that no amount of aggression could break your inner balance. You've stayed centered, you've stayed aware, and now you're closing the conversation on your terms. That's power. Picture this: someone has been loud, rude, maybe even insulting. You've listened, you've responded calmly, maybe you've asked a few grounding questions. They've thrown everything they can at you, hoping to provoke a reaction. And then, instead of giving in, you simply say something like, "I understand your point. I'm not going to continue this conversation in this tone." You keep your eyes level, your tone calm, and your body language open. That's not weakness, it's mastery. You're making it clear that this conversation will happen by your rules or not at all. And that's a boundary that even the most aggressive person can't ignore. The beauty of calm assertiveness is that it commands respect, even from those who don't like you. Because respect doesn't come from volume, it comes from consistency. People may not agree with your boundaries, but they'll learn quickly that you won't abandon them just to make others comfortable. You don't have to argue your point to exhaustion. You don't have to convince someone who doesn't want to understand. You simply end the interaction with dignity and clarity. Emotionally, this is where the real strength shows. Anyone can stay calm for a few minutes, but it takes real discipline to maintain composure when someone's trying to drag you into chaos. Aggressive people feed off reaction. It's their validation. The moment you stop feeding that energy, they lose interest. Because emotional chaos only survives if you keep contributing to it. When you end calmly, you take that last bit of power they thought they had and you turn it into silence. And that silence, that peace, is your victory. Ending with calm assertiveness also protects your emotional energy. You don't carry their anger with you after the conversation. You don't replay the argument in your head. You've already closed it with intention. You've given your side, set your limit, and stepped out with grace. You didn't absorb their chaos. You observed it and chose not to participate in it anymore. That's emotional maturity in its highest form. Now, some people will try to push harder when you remain calm. They'll see your composure as a challenge. They'll raise their voice, make snide remarks, or try one last emotional jab. And this is the moment that separates those who talk about emotional control from those who truly have it. When that happens, don't match their energy. Don't roll your eyes. Don't bite back. Just reaffirm your stance with clarity. I've said what I needed to say, or I'm not engaging in this anymore. Simple, clean, don't. This kind of ending teaches people how to treat you in the future. It communicates something very specific. Your peace is not negotiable. Your energy isn't available for chaos. You're not someone who fights to be heard, you speak to be understood. And if understanding doesn't happen, you're not afraid to walk away. That kind of detachment doesn't come from coldness. It comes from confidence. Because confident people don't need to prove their strength. They demonstrate it quietly. Calm assertiveness also leaves no emotional residue. You're not left with guilt for overreacting. You're not left with regret for saying too much. You handled yourself with self-respect from start to finish. And that's something no argument can take from you. The more you practice this kind of control, the more natural it becomes. You stop fearing confrontation because you know you can handle it without losing yourself in it. At its core, calm assertiveness is the balance between empathy and firmness. You can care about someone's feelings without tolerating their disrespect. You can understand someone's frustration without letting them project it onto you. You can listen without absorbing. You can speak without shouting. That's emotional mastery. That's what makes your presence so unshakable. Because while everyone else reacts, you respond. While others try to dominate, you stay composed. And when you leave the conversation, you leave with your dignity intact and your peace untouched. So let's bring it all together. The truth is, dealing with aggressive people isn't about learning how to shout them, outsmart them, or prove that you're right. It's about learning how to stay grounded when everything around you is designed to pull you out of character. It's about mastering yourself, your tone, your words, your silence, your composure. Because the moment you master you, no one's chaos can control you. Every verbal trick we've talked about isn't a manipulation tactic. It's emotional intelligence in motion. Staying calm under pressure, diffusing tension with curiosity, setting boundaries without raising your voice, choosing silence over reaction. These are not small things. These are skills that separate people who react from people who lead. Because real strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's intentional. It's the kind of strength that makes even the most aggressive person stop and think before crossing your line. You see, when you choose calm over chaos, you shift the balance of power. Aggressive people lose their control the moment you refuse to play their game. You take the energy they send your way and you turn it into composure, clarity, and confidence. That's how you win, not by crushing them, but by showing them that they can't shake what's solid. And this is the part most people miss. It's not about changing them. It's about mastering your response to them. Because you can't control how others behave, but you can control how long you let their behavior live rent free in your mind. The real victory isn't getting them to apologize. It's walking away, knowing you didn't betray your own peace in the process. That's how you make aggressive people sorry, not through revenge, but through restraint. You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with water, still, calm, and steady. You don't stoop to their level. You raise the standard. You don't prove your strength by shouting louder. You prove it by standing taller. And when you do that, something incredible happens. People start treating you differently. Not because they've changed, but because your energy demands it. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, remember this: you hold the real power. The power to pause, to question, to choose silence, to set boundaries, to end with calm authority. You don't need to match their aggression to protect yourself. You only need to master your reaction. That's how you win arguments without arguing. That's how you make aggressive people sorry, not through anger, but through elegance. The most powerful person in any room isn't the loudest. It's the one who doesn't need to prove a thing.